Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, August 29th around here. We have football today, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start doing a little bit more of the Week 1 predictions. We have the first two segments. We're going to do Miami versus Florida, a very hard game to pick. So I got into it a little bit, and my pick is definitely one that I feel okay about, and I think that's probably as good as you're going to get for that game. Then Penn State at West Virginia is going to be the second segment, a very tough game as well, one that you're going into Morgantown. There's always a question of if you're going to walk out with a win. Then we'll get into the top 10 teams. All of them play sort of layups in the first week, at least a couple of them. Obviously, Georgia we've already talked about, Notre Dame we'll get to tomorrow, and a couple others that are playing big-time marquee games. But we'll talk about all of the quote-unquote cupcakes in the first week and see what we need to see from the big-time teams as we head into Week 2. Then we'll get into all of the overreactions that are likely going to happen at some point in the first couple of weeks that I just want you guys to avoid. There's definitely some variables in this season and in all college football seasons at this point that definitely make it a little bit harder to gauge early on in the season. But then we'll get into the players and coaches that are under a microscope of sorts, players to watch in the first week that definitely are going to have a lot on their shoulders and might just have a couple overreactions the wrong direction if they do not deliver. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature. You see that little $sign at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. You can utilize that at any point during the show, and your name and question or comment will pop up on the screen, and I can absolutely address it. Sometimes the chat on the side goes a little bit fast to kind of gauge everyone and make sure I'm responding to everyone, so that's a great way to make sure that I absolutely see your comment and can get to it as quickly as possible. And also, if that does not work for you, you can use the GSMCpodcast.net page, still up and working, and we'll do the exact same thing. So utilize either of those if you'd like to get a little bit more involved in the show. But let's jump in here because this first game is tough. I'm going to be totally honest with you. This first game is an absolute nightmare to pick because these are two teams that are going to be fighting tooth and nail, and they're coming in kind of from two different directions. You know, a lot of people are already burying this Florida team, saying they're going to go 5-7. Billy Napier will be gone by November, and that'll be the end of this era of Florida football. There are other people saying, you know, we're going to prove the doubters wrong, including Florida. They're very much in on that ideology, and on the Miami side, it's all hype. There's no doubt about it. This is the most hyped Miami team I can remember in quite some time, and Cam Ward has a lot to do with that, and we'll get to him here in a second. But I do want to start this off. I think there's a number of different things to talk about here, but I do want to start this off with just players to watch in this game and players that could be the difference makers in this game. And we'll start with the Miami side, and I know that's a Tennessee jersey, but Tyler Barron bounced around the portal just a little bit before landing at Miami, and this is a very talented kid. I think last year you saw Ruben Bain. He was an absolute beast on that side, but there was no one on the other side that really took a lot of attention away from him. I think Nigel Kelly's a great player. I think Tyler Barron's just that little bit better, and I think he could make the difference of you can't double on the side of Ruben Bain every single time, and he's going to get to the quarterback a couple of times, and then Tyler Barron is dangerous in his own right. So either of those guys, just giving them one-on-one matchups all day could be a nightmare for Florida, I'll be totally honest. And this might be the best pass rush that Florida faces all year, honestly. Moving on, Elijah Arroyo, a tight end at Miami, very talented kid, someone that was going to hit the ground running last year, but ran into a little bit of injury trouble and is now ready to hit the ground running this year. I think it's a very, very comfortable option for Cam Ward. You know, whenever you have that tight end that you feel really good about, that you're in sync with, I think you're going to be the kind of comfort option, the guy that you go to on that third down that you know is going to make a catch. I tend to believe that's going to be Elijah Arroyo. They have plenty of weapons over there at Miami, but I think this is a guy that you might not know about that you're going to hear the name called at least a couple of times on Saturday. Trey or Eugene Wilson, whichever one you want to call him, he's a very, very talented kid and honestly one of the best football players on the field on Saturday. He's one of the most under-talked about wide receivers in the country, and I think he could be a real problem for that Miami backend. Incredibly fast, really good route runner, someone that if you get the ball in his hands, he's probably going to do something special with it. So definitely a guy to watch there. And then finally, Joey Slackman is someone I'm watching for Florida. They need to get push on that O-line against Miami because it's a really good O-line. And if they're not able to get pushed, it's going to be a lot of Damian Martinez, a lot of Mark Fletcher Jr., and it's just going to be domination for Miami for most of this game. But Joey Slackman and another number of people across that defensive line are going to have to be huge on Saturday, and I think if he can show up, then Florida might just have a real shot in this game to make some noise. But overall, this game obviously has a lot going into it. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's an in-state rivalry. It's one that we don't really get to see too often, and we'll get to that right now with all of the big-time storylines as we head into this one. The coaches are under pressure. There's no doubt about that. When you talk about all of the coaches on the quote-unquote hot seat, it does not take long for you to say Billy Napier or Mario Cristobal. Mario Cristobal is a little bit different of an example because I doubt he would be fired at the end of this year almost regardless of the results, but things would definitely get interesting if he lost this game and they started to tumble throughout this season. And then on the other side, Billy Napier is fighting for his job this year. There's no other way to put it. At the end of the day, he has to probably get to 6, 7, maybe even 8 wins, probably 6 or 7 wins to keep that job, and it'll be interesting to watch it, and he might just need this one to get to 7 wins this year. It is a rare rivalry. We don't see it quite as often as we would all love to see it, obviously. They've only played 7 times since 1987 and only 3 times since 2004. The energy is still the same. There's no doubt about that. Every time these two teams get on the field, you still feel that rivalry energy. You still feel all of that juice in that stadium. So I can't imagine Saturday's going to be any different. And it's obviously one of those that we've missed a lot throughout the last little bit. But at the end of the day, when they get on the field, it still has that rivalry feel to it. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And then finally, the QB matchup is very fascinating. You know, Cam Ward coming over from the portal, one of the most highly touted guys out of the portal from Washington State, and then Graham Mertz was really good a year ago. I know the numbers weren't absolutely gaudy when it comes to passing yards and touchdowns and all of that type of stuff, but completion percentage, number 3 in the country a year ago, does exactly what they want him to do and executes this offense at a really high level. So it's going to be 2 very different approaches at quarterback, no doubt about that, but it's going to be a great matchup nonetheless. But moving on, let's talk about how Miami can win this game. The big one is just let your O-line eat. There's a reality here where if I'm looking across this matchup, I think there's a couple of matchups that are totally leaning in one direction. I think the line of scrimmage for the offensive line of Miami is going to be one of those. I think they're going to be able to get the push that they want, even with guys like Joey Slackman and LJ McCray and a number of other guys on that other side. I just think it's going to be too much. It's a very, very talented group. Francis Mauigoa is one of my favorite and one of the best offensive tackles in the country and is going to do incredible things this year. And then once he's draft eligible, he will be one of the first offensive lineman names called, maybe the first. And then Zach Carpenter coming over from Indiana is an absolutely huge help. This guy is going to be an absolute beast on that interior, and they're going to need to get interior push because that run game just needs to be the center of this offense. I understand you have all the weapons in the world and you have a fantastic quarterback with Cam Ward, but those guys aren't going to be able to get open if you can't establish that run game and open up passing lanes on the backside. So let that offensive line eat, run the ball early, and then let Cam Ward take over late. And then on the defensive side of the ball, keep everything in front of you. There is a big-time worry, for me at least, around this Miami back end. I think they're still going to be coming along early on in this season, and they're going to be facing some real good players on Saturday. Trey Wilson, we've talked about, an absolute beast on the outside. And then Elijah Badger, coming over from Arizona State, has gotten rave reviews out of fall camp. I think he's going to be a monster. They got plenty of weapons to absolutely attack you, and I think when you look at this Miami back end, very talented. Plenty of guys that can play really good football. Michelle Powell, I absolutely love. I think Markeith Williams is going to be a really good player for this team. But at the end of the day, it is a group that is a little bit unexperienced. It is a group that is going to rely on some younger players, and if Florida can hit 1 or 2 big plays, this game might be over in a hurry. So keeping everything in front of you, tackling well is going to be huge for this defense. And then just get some of that Cam Ward magic. That's why you brought him over. There's no two ways about that. You brought him over because there are certain plays that Cam Ward makes that not a lot of people across the country can make. He is that talented. He has that ability. So he's one of those guys that just make sure that he's in a good spot. Make sure that offensive line is not bearing down on him and they're not getting pushed in on him all day. And then just wait, because there's going to be a play in this game where he escapes a rush and throws a ball 30 yards downfield, maybe for a first down and a big-time gain. So at the end of the day, Miami has a ton in their direction when it comes to talent level in this game. But the biggest one is that quarterback, and just let him make that big play and then possibly silence the swamp just a little bit. Moving on to Florida, I think it's very simple. You got to control the possession in this game. The biggest asset for Miami is what we just talked about, Cam Ward and that offense. If you keep them on the sideline, you have every ability to win this game, especially with the fans at your back, because that is going to be a huge part of this game as well, which is something that you'll definitely feel on Saturday. I can promise you that. They were 16th in the country a year ago in time of possession, 32 minutes, 11 seconds, so they know how to do this. There's no doubt about that. Montrell Johnson does have to be healthy. We'll figure out what happens with that, likely when things kick off on Saturday, if I had to imagine, but a very, very talented guy, and they have some guys behind him. I like Trayon Webb a ton. I think Jacoby Jackson is going to be a really good player, so I do think that's going to be the path to victory. Make sure you have your offense on the field way more than that other offense with Cam Ward, Xavier Restrepo, Damian Martinez. As long as they are on the sideline, you're in relatively good shape if you're Florida. And then you need elite play from Austin Barber and Crenshaw Dixon. You need both those guys to play elite level football because, as we talked about earlier, Ruben Bain and Tyler Barron are coming off the edge, and they are going to be a monster to deal with. And both those guys need to bring their A game. Crenshaw is coming over from SDSU, a very talented guy. Played 9 starts a year ago, 5 at left tackle, 4 at right tackle. He'll be at right tackle this year. And then Austin Barber made 9 starts for the Gators a year ago. So both these guys have starting experience. It's going to be a step up on Saturday. I can promise you that, and they're going to have their hands full. But if they can keep that pocket clean and let Graham Mertz go through his progressions, it might just be hard for this Miami defense to stop this Florida offense. And then finally, keep Cam Ward in the pocket. Make sure that he is standing still, because at the end of the day, what we just talked about is when he gets out of the pocket, he is downright special. He can do things that a lot of people across this country cannot do. So edge rushers, Justice Boone, TJ Searcy, they need to be up the field, make sure everything stays within that pocket, and do not let Cam Ward get out of it, because then you're asking your cornerbacks to guard for a little bit too long against these talented Miami receivers. So that's the big thing. With Cam Ward, it's a little bit feast or famine, and the feast tends to be when he leaves that pocket. The famine tends to be when he has to stand in and makes those NFL-level throws that he has struggled with in the past. So that's the goal. If you can keep him in that pocket, if you can keep him still, then you're likely in a pretty good shape around Cam Ward. And I got to be honest, making a pick on this game is an absolute nightmare. I don't love it either way, but I'm going to do something a little bit stupid, and I think I'm going to feel a little bit stupid on Saturday. But at the end of the day, I am going to take Florida to win this one. I think we have an absolute nail-biter on our hands. There's no doubt about that. I think we're going to have a late kick that wins this one way or the other. I just think it's going to be Trey Smack hitting through the uprights. I think he's going to make a big-time kick late in this one, and Florida escapes with a win, and they very much need it. I really like the over 53.5 in this game because at the end of the day, I don't think either of these defenses are fully equipped to stop the offense on the other side, with Miami's back end not being what it needs to be. If Florida can get the ball out quickly, which they do very, very often, they can be successful. And then Miami, they should be able to just impose their will running the ball, and then got plenty of special players on the outside. So I am going to take Florida. I don't feel good about it. I'll be totally honest with you. I think if I took Miami, I wouldn't feel great about it. But at the end of the day, I am going to take Florida to win that one by 1 at home and get their season off on a very, very nice foot. And then we'll see what the conversation is around Miami at the end of that game. I probably won't change my tune too much, but there will definitely be some people ready to dunk on Miami, if you will. But let's take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to get into Penn State at West Virginia, another rivalry that we get not often enough that I want to get into right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing losing it. The news if it's some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down the Miami versus Florida game. I am picking Florida. I do not feel great about it. I'll be totally honest with you, but I think if I picked Miami, I wouldn't feel any better about it. So I'm going to roll forward with that, and then we'll reconvene on Monday, and you guys are more than welcome to come back and dunk on me. But let's get into this Penn State at West Virginia game, because this one is also very, very hard to get a beat on, and we'll start this one the same exact way we started the Miami one. Players to watch, and there are so many in this game, but I think it starts with Harrison Wallace. When you talk about this Penn State offense, there's no doubt about it. This is the guy. This is the guy that has to make a number of plays for them this year on the outside at wide receiver, or they're going to be the same team they were at wide receiver a year ago. It's going to be very stagnant. They're not going to have a lot of options out there, and it's going to be an offense that leaves a lot on the table. But Harrison Wallace can open things up, and if he can do it on Saturday, I feel really confident about his ability throughout pretty much the entirety of Penn State's schedule. So this is the guy. If he can make big plays on Saturday and show that he's ready to take that wide receiver one spot, then you got to feel really good if you're a Penn State fan. And then Kobe McLeod is someone I think is super important. He's taking over for Abdul Carter kind of in the middle of that defense, likely will be the green dot guy for this defense, and it's going to be super important. Obviously, the communication is a huge part of it, but at the end of the day, this is going to be a West Virginia team that's going to run the ball and run the ball and run the ball. And the run fits for the linebackers is going to be hugely important. You know, you're not going to necessarily get elite push against this offensive line, I think at least, because of how good this offensive and veteran this offensive line is for West Virginia. But if your linebackers can be sure tacklers, you'll feel really good about what you can do against this running attack. Moving over to West Virginia, Jaden Bray is someone I want to watch because he's coming over from Oklahoma State in the portal and a very, very talented player. This is one of those guys that I think just put in a little bit of a different offensive system can absolutely open things up. And I think with Garrett Green, you know, they're going to be able to run the ball. They're going to be able to pull everyone in. Then maybe you get Jaden Bray for one big-time play over the top, and that totally changes this game. So definitely got to watch to just maybe make that one big-time play towards the end and maybe win it for West Virginia. And then Wyatt Milam. I wanted to go on the defensive side of the ball, but I had to include this guy because he's going to get a ton of Abdul Carter on Saturday, and that's the most terrifying guy on the field. That is the best football player on the field by a pretty comfortable margin on Saturday. I can promise you that, and he's going to have to play A-plus football. Wyatt Milam has to make sure that he is fully ready for what Abdul Carter has to bring him because you're not going to win every time. I'm not expecting him to absolutely dominate Abdul Carter. I don't think anyone would, but at the end of the day, if he can hold serve, if he can keep him just at bay for a little bit and then let Garrett Green in this offense do its thing, I think that's more than enough. So a huge, huge thing for him and definitely will be really fun to watch. But heading into this one, Penn State is favored by 8 points right now, the over-under 51.5, so a little bit kind of in-between game, probably a little bit more run-heavy game, and that's going to be one of the things we'll get into throughout this. But the big storylines, Penn State's coaching changes likely top the list. When you talk about Tom Allen coming in as the new DC, taking over from Manny Diaz, and then Andy Kotelnicki, the new OC, taking over for I'm blanking on his name right now. I apologize. But the former play caller for the Penn State Nittany Lions, he's coming over from Kansas. That was a very different offense than what they ran a year ago, which is kind of going to be an interesting discussion during this game. You know, how quickly can Drew Aller come along in this new offense and feel comfortable, especially with that crowd noise from Morgantown at his back. So it'll be interesting to watch that. And then, is this West Virginia's big moment? They're coming off a year where they went 9-4, where Neil Brown got himself from off the hot seat to one of the safest coaches in that conference, honestly. And he's in a place where maybe Saturday is the point where they launch themselves back into national relevance. Maybe this is the point where they get that big time win and they're the main story on Monday, not Clemson, not Georgia, not Penn State, well, obviously, not Penn State, but using this moment could be absolutely huge, and there's a chance West Virginia just has a little bit of magic on Saturday. And then we got to talk about how this rivalry just needs to be here way more often. They played every single year up until 1992 and then went off for about 31 years. They came back last year, and after this matchup, doesn't sound like there's any other scheduled. So could this be the last time we see these two face off? There's a lot of people that are kind of lessening their out-of-conference schedule to give them a little bit more wiggle room in the playoff era. So maybe this is one that goes by the wayside. I very much hope it's not, because gotta love the backyard brawl. But at the end of the day, it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. Moving on, how can Penn State win this game? And it's pretty simple, if I'm being totally honest, when you talk about from a game plan perspective. Win on early downs. That is the number one goal for this team. You have an elite running back duo with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. You have a quarterback in Drew Aller that you don't really know what you have quite yet. You feel really confident in him. He's taken big-time strides throughout this offseason, but you're not really sure what he's going to do when he walks into Morgantown for that Week 1 matchup, keeping him in manageable third downs, keeping him in passing downs that aren't 3rd and 8, they're 3rd and 4, or 3rd and 5, is huge for this game. So absolutely, it's something that where you have a O-line that could be a little bit questionable. I think they're going to be more than fine throughout time, but replacing Olu Fashanu in that very first game, maybe Drew Shelton struggles just a little bit out there on Saturday, but overall, I think you look at this team, they're going to be able to run the ball. That is the ultimate goal of this team, and if they can stay in front of the sticks and win on early downs and then give Drew Aller some moments to pick their shots that we'll get to here in a second, it's obviously going to be very beneficial for this team. And then let's get to the pick your shots, because this is something that was glaringly obvious to everyone that was watching Penn State a year ago. They did not take any shots. They did not go down the field much at all. And if the one thing that was talked about with Drew Aller when he was coming into that starting job and when he was really coming out of high school into college, it was that arm talent. It was the arm strength. It was everything that he can do with the football. And they did not utilize that nearly enough a year ago. And I think some of that is obviously the wide receiver talent. Some of that is what he can do. Some of that is the scheme. But they got to make sure they pick their moments. It can't be another year where it's a lot of dinking and dunking and then maybe you take one shot at an inopportune time. Pick your moments, but absolutely stretch the ball down the field and then find that receiver that can do that, because that might be another worry of theirs. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to stretch the field if you want to be effective against the Ohio States and the Michigans, where that run game's going to be your bread and butter, no doubt about it. But you can't really run the ball if you can't stretch those safeties and linebackers just a little bit further back to open up some running lanes. And then the final one, elite linebacker play is just absolutely necessary in this game. We talked about Kobe McLeod, and Tony Rojas is going to be another huge player for this game, but C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White are going to run the ball a ton in this game for West Virginia. There's no doubt about that. And then Garrett Green's going to get plenty of rushes himself. I can promise you that as well. And then I think it's going to be one of those things, as long as they are sure tacklers at that second level, as long as they can get those guys on the ground for a 3-yard gain instead of an 8-yard gain or 7-yard gain, they're going to be in really good shape. So it really just comes down to these guys being elite tacklers. They've been that way in the past, and I expect them to be that way on Saturday, but C.J. Donaldson is a load to take down, so it might just be a little bit tougher, and we'll see if they can get that on Saturday, and if they can, then I'd be a little bit surprised if West Virginia can get into the groove on offense that they want to. Moving on to West Virginia, let's talk about that quarterback run just a little bit, because Garrett Green is one of the special guys in the country. 704 rushing yards a year ago, and you have Abdul Carter, you have Danny Dennis Sutton on the other side for Penn State, and you do have Wyatt Milam, you do have Nick Malone. I think those are both really good tackles for West Virginia, but they're going to get home a couple of times. Abdul Carter is absolutely going to get a win at least a couple of times in this game, and you're going to have to find a way to keep him at bay. I think the quarterback run game is the way to do that. Obviously, whenever you do that mesh concept where it's a read option, the defensive end is going to crash or he's going to stay out with that quarterback. Having that ability to know that quarterback can take the ball and can take it around the edge for 30, 40 yards because he's that talented is an X factor. It keeps Abdul Carter honest. It keeps all of these edge rushers honest and make sure that this pass rush or this rush in general just does not get home as quickly. So I think that quarterback run game is going to be huge in this game. You know, Garrett Green could make that one play where he squeezes out of the pocket and scrambles for 12 yards for a first down, or he runs that read option perfectly and Abdul Carter crashes down on the running back. He pulls the ball for 12 yards and a first down. So I think that's kind of the opening here that Penn State obviously does not have with Drew Aller. You can open up a number of different doors running the ball with the quarterback run game that might just confuse this Penn State defense just a little bit. And then also on the defensive side, force Aller to beat you. Frankly, it's one of those things that maybe Drew Aller has fully changed all of his worries from a year ago. Maybe he is fully ready to totally dominate this upcoming year, but I'd rather figure that out than figure out that Katron Allen and Nick Singleton are going to tear me to pieces, because that is what's going to happen. There's no doubt about that. There is a doubt that if you put the ball in Drew Aller's hands, he's capable of making the plays. Put the ball in his hands, try to stop this run as much as you possibly can, and bet that these wide receivers and this quarterback are not going to be where they need to beat you. I think that's the best way to go about business. Obviously, you got to play really sticky coverage on the outside. You got to play really, really good man coverage, but at the end of the day, this is going to be the way that they're likely going to be able to win, is stop that run and then say, if Drew Aller's going to beat us, so be it. And then finally, get the crowd into it early. There's no two ways about that. When you're at West Virginia, when you're in Morgantown, you can feel it. And it's going to be one of the big-time advantages in their direction, one of the few advantages in their direction, if I'm being honest. And I think they got to utilize it from the jump. Frankly, if I was them, I would take the ball first if I won that coin toss, and I would go down and try to score immediately. Because then you got a lead on the board, you got the crowd into it, and then Penn State's got to walk onto the field to a rowdy bunch in Morgantown. So I think that's the ultimate goal. You know, it's not going to be the prettiest game from West Virginia, and probably it shouldn't be if they're going to win this one. They want it to be low scoring. They want it to be running the ball. They want it to be controlling the clock, and then force Drew Aller to make a couple of plays down the stretch in front of this just ridiculous crowd on Saturday. So it's a pretty relatively simple path forward for West Virginia. No, you have a couple of things at your back that are going to really help you, but at the end of the day, when I look at this game, I'm going to pick the most talented guy on the field. Abdul Carter is going to make a couple of plays in this game that just totally change it. And it could be that we're walking into the fourth quarter as a 4-point game, you know, West Virginia 17, Penn State 21, and then Abdul Carter gets a strip sack and someone takes it back for a touchdown. So I don't necessarily think it's going to be the prettiest game offensively from Penn State. I think Drew Aller's still going to have some things to work through, but I don't think it's going to be all that pretty on the other side either. So I think we're looking at a little bit of a fight here. I do love the under with these heavy run offenses, but at the end of the day, I think this is going to be one of those where you're going to have a battle back and forth for 3 quarters, and then Penn State's going to have that one big play from that one huge player that's going to totally change this game and likely bury West Virginia for this one. So I am going to pick Penn State. I think that's one of those games that everyone's circling saying, well, a top 10 team in Florida State went down last week. It's got to be someone else this week, and it very well could be. We'll get into the Notre Dame game tomorrow, but at the end of the day, I am not going to pick Penn State to lose that game, but I am going to pick it to be very, very close towards the end of that one. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about all of the top 10 teams. There are a couple that are playing what we call cupcakes in the first week of the season, and I want to break down just what do we have to see from these teams. Obviously, we're not going to see too much because likely you'd like to get your starters out pretty quickly in these games, but at the end of the day, what do we have to see early on to just feel confident going into week 2 where a couple of these teams have just massive matchups? So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast. Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down the Penn State versus West Virginia game. I did give Penn State the win 28-17. I think that one's going to be a defensive battle, but I think Abdul Carter makes one big-time play towards the end of that game to decide it. But let's jump into segment 3 here, and I kind of just wanted to go through all the top 10 teams. They're about to play their first game of the season. Just what do we need to see from all of these teams against fairly inferior opponents? What do we need to see to feel confident as they head into the rest of their season? And a couple of them that play really big games in week 2. So let's jump into this real quick and, let's start with Ohio State because it's about time. Ohio State has been the team that we've talked about ad nauseum throughout this offseason, and they're about to tee it up. At 3:30 on Saturday, they are teeing it up against Akron. Obviously not the big-time opponent that everyone wants to see against Ohio State in week 1, but Ohio State favored by 48.5, the over-under at 58.5. That should give you an idea of how this game should go. And frankly, I want to see everything from this team. I want to see Will Howard get a big-time confidence boost, put up ridiculous numbers, run the ball really effectively, make some big throws, and then by about halftime or early in the third quarter, get him out of there and make sure that he's healthy for week 2. Then I want to see a level of aggression that you haven't seen from this Ohio State team in quite some time, especially in these games that might just be not quite as important, might not be quite as jump-off-the-page type material. They still have to show that level of intensity. When you look at the elite teams over the last couple of years, Michigan and Georgia, every single game was the same level. Every single game from a defensive and offensive perspective was the same. They were going to run through you. They were going to beat you for 4 hours and then ask for you to quit, and you were going to quit. I promise you that. So that's going to be the goal for this Ohio State team. Make teams quit, and that's what they should be doing on Saturday. So I don't care if it's Akron. I don't care if it's Middle Tennessee State. I don't care if it's every FCS school or a high school. I want Ohio State playing with a level of energy that I haven't seen over the last couple of years, and that'll make me feel pretty good about what they know this season holds. And then I expect this thing to be 50-7, something like that. It's going to be absolutely ridiculous, but I do want them to keep the foot on the gas pedal. I don't necessarily want them to throw deep every play and totally tear this team apart, but I do want them to continue to call aggressively, even if it's not your starters out there. Just show everyone that you are coming into this season meaning business. This is about message sending more than anything else for Ohio State in week 1. Just say, we are who we are. We're going to go about this in a certain manner that we haven't really in the past, and we're going to play a level of football that is going to be just incredibly hard to game plan for, because you can't really game plan for a big guy running at you and just running through your face. So I think that's the ultimate goal for this team. Set the tone for this season, because at the end of it, it's one mission: win a national title, and you got to come out running to do that. So I expect them to totally roll over Akron, but I want to see some nuances in there that make me feel a little bit more confident about just the energy of this team as they head into this year. Moving on to Oregon, they play Idaho, and there are no lines on this game for a reason. This one is an absolute nightmare. Idaho is walking into a buzzsaw, let's just be totally honest. The Vandals are definitely a little bit over their skis here, but I'm sure they'll get a little pretty check at the end of this, so it'll make it all worth it. At the end of the day, what I want to see here is just all these guys ready to roll. You have so many guys being imported through the portal, and you have so many different pieces on offense and defense that you have to make sure are in place. I just want to see them all come together. I want to see Dillon Gabriel be really efficient in this game. Jordan James and Noah Whittington get over 100 yards rushing. I want to see big plays from all the wide receivers that you have out there. And then it's Dante Moore time. And then you allow the backup to get in there, get some reps in case Dillon Gabriel, like he has in the past in his career, goes down with an injury and you have to make a play late in the season. So it's going to be interesting to watch this game. I think the focus for me is largely going to be on the defensive side of the ball. I feel really good about what that offense can do, but the defense largely portaled in guys. And the question isn't that can they make plays against Idaho. I feel very confident that they're going to be able to win this one and not give up a lot of points in the process, but are they playing as 11 people? Are they playing as 11 or are they playing as one 11 guys playing as one is the best way to put this, instead of 11 guys just playing on their own, because that was a big time problem in the Florida State game where everything just looked like it was one guy trying to make a play and then the other guy was trying to make an entirely different play. They weren't playing in unison, they weren't playing in sync. That's the thing that you need to figure out on defense, and then get the depth involved very, very early, because when you talk about this defense, the depth is the big time issue for this team. There's no doubt about that. I think they very much need to build out that depth throughout the next little bit, and the only way really to do that is to make sure these guys get in-game reps. You get Idaho in the first week, it's the perfect time to get in-game reps before Boise State comes to town and starts to really go after you on offense. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one. I think it's one of those that obviously you will likely skip over because Oregon will be up by a ton, but some of the nuances of that game could show us exactly how far along this Oregon team with a lot of portal pieces are as of right now. Moving on to Texas playing Colorado State, this one's going to be a little bit more fun. The over-under set at 60.5. Texas is favored by 32, so I don't expect necessarily a close game, but I do think this is a perfect opening game for Texas. I think when you look at the past two problems, or the problems from the past year, pass rush and pass defense, period, end of story. Those are the two things that held them back from likely winning a national title, and they both will be tested on Saturday. Colorado State absolutely loves to throw the ball, and one of the things is they love to throw it quickly. It's not like these long developing plays, so maybe the pass rush is a little bit mitigated there, and we'll have to kind of read between the lines to see how quickly they were able to make an effect on that quarterback. But at the end of the day, Torrey Horton is going to be the focal point of this offense, one of the best wide receivers in the country for Colorado State, and they're going to get the ball to him in a hurry. So Texas is going to have to be sure tackling. They're going to have that back end just in better places throughout the game and see if they're playing as one unit. It'll be really interesting to watch this, but overall, the job is very simple. Get to the quarterback, either whether it's sacks or just pressuring him to make that throw a little bit tougher, and then play great man coverage on the back end. That is going to be something you see a ton from Texas this year, is a lot of pressure with linebackers and safeties and different things, and then a lot of man coverage. If they can do it on Saturday, I feel pretty confident about their ability to do it throughout the year, because this is a very pass-heavy, impressive passing team on the other side in Colorado State. And then 3, don't allow the big play. Don't allow Colorado State to get their feet under them, get confident. So keep a cap on everything, kind of like Miami against Florida. Keep everything in front of you. That's the ultimate goal. So we'll figure out, and it's relatively easy against this offense, but just to make sure they don't change this game on a dime, keep everything in front of you. And then in the offense, just let the boys cook. Get everyone involved, spread the ball around, dominate the run game, get Jaden Blue a really, really good day, and make sure that Quinn Ewers is throwing the ball around all over the place. And then at halftime, hit the showers, come back out in street clothes. That's the ultimate goal for this game, and I think at the end of the day, they feel pretty confident in their ability. They have so many different weapons out there, but you want to see pretty much all of them get their hands on the ball and just see what you have if you're Texas going into week 2, which is going to be a doozy up in Ann Arbor. Then we'll get into Alabama, and this one's a little bit interesting to me as well, because I think a weakness for Alabama is going to be tested. Alabama's favored by 31.5, 32, depending on where you look right now. Over-under set at 59.5, and TJ Finley is going to be the starting quarterback on the other side of the field, and he has made 2 starts against Alabama throughout his career, I believe, when he was at Auburn for both of them, and took him to 4 overtimes in 2021. Now, the defense had a lot to do with that, no doubt about that, but a very talented kid that knows what it's like to step into that stadium. So it'll be really interesting to see what he can do. I think this is one of those games that Alabama has one glaring problem heading into the season. It's that back-end defense. It's very young, doesn't have the depth that you really want it to have. They're going to be tested. Western Kentucky is going to throw the ball, and they're going to throw the ball a ton all over the field. So guys like Xavier Brown are going to be tested. Jalen Mbakwe, we're going to see a lot of, and I cannot wait to see a lot of. And Xavier Mincy, we're going to see a lot of. So they're going to have to be ready to go. And if they're not ready to go, then maybe we see a couple of cracks that could become huge monumental cracks when they go up to Wisconsin in week 3 or even in week 2 when they head to USF. I believe I saw a stat a couple of days ago. I can't remember where it's from, but it was an incredible stat that said the last 5 head coaches at Alabama in their first year had lost at least 1 game to a group of 5 opponent. So this one could get sketchy. And then they have USF the next week. That one could get sketchy. So just something to keep in mind over the first couple of weeks for Alabama, that maybe they drop one of these. If history tells us anything, they might just drop one of these games that they are not supposed to drop by any means. Moving on, Ole Miss at Furman. Again, another one that has no lines. Again, another one that should have no lines because no one is picking Furman. I'm being totally honest with you. So this one is plainly and simply about dominating defensively, flexing your muscles offensively. Show that this portal group, kind of like what I was talking about with Oregon, make sure they're playing as one unit. Make sure it's not 11 guys trying to put 11 different things on tape for NFL scouts. Make sure that is a one unit that is working in unison, because if you can do that throughout this entire season, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a defense that has more talent and more ability than Ole Miss. So it's going to be really awesome to watch this game. And then offensively, I think it should just be the run game in this one. The O-line is the big-time worry I have in this game, and the best way to get them in on a season is just have them bowl over people for 4 quarters. Just have them totally dominate the line of scrimmage, which they very well should be able to do in this game, and then get rolling on in the pass game, whether it's Jackson Dart and all these weapons around, or playing around with some different things. At the end of the day, it's likely going to be pretty vanilla in the pass game, but I think the run game, if we see a really dominant force on that offensive line, you feel at least a little bit more confident in what this Ole Miss team can do this upcoming year. And then Michigan has the toughest one. There's no doubt about that. They kick off against Fresno State at Saturday at 7:30 p.m. They are favored by 21 points in this game. 45.5 is the over-under, and this one's going to be really interesting. There's no doubt about that. Michigan coming in, being the center of the news cycle with all of the Connor Stallion stuff and everything crazy like that. Also, if you're looking for a review of that documentary, I'm probably not going to give it to you. Maybe I'll give a little mini one tomorrow. I'm kind of sick of talking about it, if I'm being totally honest with you, and I think that documentary was a little ridiculous. But I'll leave it at that for the time being. Maybe I'll give you guys a little bit more tomorrow. But at the end of the day, there are a ton of questions as you head into this season for this team, a ton of changes, and Fresno State has become one of the most consistent products in college football, all the way back to when Jeff Tedford showed up the first time around there. So definitely a huge team, and going to be a little bit of a battle for Michigan. Mikey Keene is the quarterback over there for the Bulldogs, and this guy can definitely cause some problems. He is a pocket passer, which could make things a little bit easier for this Michigan defense, but at the end of the day, it could be a player that you look up around halftime of this game, and Mikey Keene is keeping Fresno State in this game for just a little bit longer than you wanted to. The Michigan defense is the thing that I really just want to get an idea of how this thing is going to run. Wink Martindale, obviously a fantastic football mind. I think Jayshon Barham is the guy that I just cannot wait to watch, because when they got him, it was downright special, and the reports from camp have been downright special. So I cannot wait to see what he can do. And then the biggest thing is get Alex Orji in a rhythm. That's the number one goal of this game. Make sure he has a groove in this offense, because you're walking into a game next week against Texas where they took advantage of a guy that was not fully ready for his offense and was not fully comfortable in his offense in week 2 last year, and it could be the same fate for Alex Orji if they are not careful. So it's really about making sure that Alex Orji walks out of this game with his head held high, feeling very confident about what he did and his ability to run this offense. That is the ultimate goal on Saturday. And then make sure that you win it, because this one might get a little bit closer than some people might expect. So it's going to be a really, really fun week for all of those teams. I think most of them, you're likely going to see pretty aggressive score lines, 50-7 or 42-6, or some of those score lines we tend to see in week 1, but doesn't mean we're not going to get a lot out of those games. You want to see a little bit from those top 10 teams just to give you an idea of who they're going to be going forward. Obviously, not the end-all be-all by any means, but definitely gives us an idea of just where they're at as of right now and where they could be going forward. So definitely we'll get into that throughout those couple of games early next week. But what I want to get into in the 4th segment is all of the overreactions that are going to happen throughout the first couple of weeks. There are a couple of things that have been introduced to this sport that have caused the first couple of weeks to just be a little bit more chaotic, and then some teams to kind of just round into form. So I want to break down the 6 that I kind of pinpointed, at least most readily pinpointed, and we'll get into that right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the top 10 teams. What do we need to see from them in week 1? How do we need to feel good about them going into week 2? What are the nuances that you need to be watching for, and what likely are going to be a lot of blowouts for those top 10 teams? But let's get into all of the overreactions that are going to happen early on in this season. I can just feel it, and I want you guys to, at your best at least, avoid these as best you can. So let's go ahead and jump into this thing, and there's this big one that has been happening over the last couple of years. There are going to be teams that have a ton of portal players coming in that lose in week 1. That is just going to happen. Whether it's, Colorado possibly losing tonight against North Dakota State, or Miami possibly losing to Florida on Saturday. It's going to happen. There's going to be a team that comes out just a little bit clunky. Florida State in week 0, we saw it happen. It was a ton of portal players that they were trying to fit together that they just couldn't quite get together at the speed that they wanted to. Now, all of these teams had an extra week, which definitely helps, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be one of those things that is going to develop over the first couple of weeks where you see teams look a little bit clunky, look like they're just trying to get along and trying to get those wins, and then they really hit their stride. I think Miami might be the best example of this. I picked them to lose to Florida. I still think they're going to go to the playoff. I think this is a very, very good team. I just think with Cam Ward coming in with kind of the feast or famine style that he plays with and a lot of the different questions on the defensive side of the ball, I think they're going to take some time to get together. So losing week 1 to Florida would not change my opinion on Miami. It's the exact same team. It's the exact same team that I bought into early on in the season. They're just going to have to round into form, and I think that's something that we're going to have to give them a couple of weeks for. So if you're going to jump all over, maybe Oregon doesn't play quite as clean as you want against Boise State, or maybe Ole Miss looks a little bit clunky on offense throughout the first couple of weeks. Just give them a little bit of time, because at some point these guys are going to let everything click, everything's going to come together, and then it's going to be a really dangerous team. But at the end of the day, you might see just a couple of those big-time portal teams lose early on, and then maybe a lot of people kind of dunking on them or burying them or writing them off. I wouldn't do that just yet, at least. Moving on, young quarterbacks are just not going to look great in their first big game. That tends to be something that happens throughout everyone's career, is they play that first big game in the first couple of weeks of their first starting season, and things just don't look all that great. Whether it's jitters or just not being super comfortable in the offense, what have you, there are a number of things that can jump in your way. I mean, Miller Moss and Garrett Nussmeier are about to play a big one on Sunday, and frankly, I think both those guys are likely going to be fine because of how long they've been in the system, but there's a reality where early on in that first quarter, they're sailing balls, a couple of balls are just getting away from them because of those jitters, and then they settle down and they settle in. And then the one that I'm watching, Tennessee versus NC State in Charlotte, is a very interesting one. You have Nico Iamaleava, an uber-talented young kid that I think the talent and the ability is absolutely through the roof. And then you have Grayson McCall, a sixth-year senior, very confident in pretty much any situation he's been thrown into, but is taking a step up into that Power 5 level. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold, but I wouldn't be all that surprised if Nico came out and was just a little bit flat, just didn't look all the way there, and it doesn't mean that he's not going to be all the way there in the coming weeks, because I think this kid's going to be an absolute monster this year, but there's a reality in week 2 where he goes into Charlotte and things just look a little bit clunky at times, so definitely something to watch there. And then the other guy I'm watching is Alex Orji. He plays that game in week 2 against Texas, and we talked about it a little bit, but it has that Alabama feeling to me. It has that Alabama against Texas feeling where you have a quarterback that is uber talented running the ball, that struggles to throw the ball, that you're going to have to get into the offense at some point or another throughout the season. I just think it starts a little bit slower than they want it to, and he makes a couple of mistakes in that game, and things look a little bit clunky, but he rebounds and has a great season after that. So I think he's a very capable player, but that week 2 matchup could look a little bit ugly. And then if you want to talk about another week 2 matchup, Dylan Raiola against Colorado could look a little bit clunky. That is a lot on his shoulders in a rivalry game at home with a ton of people around him maybe things just don't look quite as crisp as you want them to look for these quarterbacks. But at the end of the day, they could be very, very good down the road. So just hold back just a little bit on these young quarterbacks going into those first big games, because there's a reality where the next big game they play, they absolutely light the world on fire. And then moving on, a veteran team is going to win a big-time game at home, and really just any team winning a big-time game at home early on in the season is going to happen. Whether you're talking about A&M against Notre Dame or you're talking about West Virginia against Penn State, there's going to be a moment where you see a team that is more talented, that has more ability, that is higher ranked, go into a really raucous atmosphere and just fall a little bit short. It could happen in week 2 when Texas goes up to Ann Arbor. That's a real possibility, where Texas just gets totally overwhelmed by that atmosphere and ends up falling in that game. And that's something that is going to be kind of hard to gauge, because obviously Texas is going up there thinking that they're going to win that game. But when you talk about all of these different environments that are going to be on display this upcoming year, Wisconsin is hosting Bama in week 3. And I think that's one of those games that not only is it very far away and Bama hasn't played well on the road, but that's a really good atmosphere that is going to get after Bama in a way that I'm not sure they're fully prepared for. So I think it's one of those things that home field advantage is always huge in college football. No two ways about that. That's why some people are trying to be the 5 seed instead of the 1 seed in the playoff. But at the end of the day, if you get those big time games at home early, I think it means so much more. I think you have a real springboard for your team. So whether it's Wisconsin knocking off Bama, or it's Michigan knocking off Texas, or West Virginia over Penn State, it's going to happen early on. And I just want people to make sure that we fully understand just how much home field advantage means, especially in college football. And then moving on, I think new play callers coming out of the gates just a little bit clunky in their new system. And I want to talk about DeAnton Lynn here pretty quickly, because he's walking into a USC defense that has tons of talent, that has tons of names. They're not there from a strength and conditioning standpoint. They're not there from a scheme standpoint. They're not there from a technical standpoint. So there's a reality where things come out just a little bit iffy against LSU, and frankly, I'd be a little bit surprised if they didn't come out a little bit iffy against that LSU offense. And then on the other side, you have Blake Baker, which is the exact same conversation. You know, you just don't want it to be downright disgusting. That's the goal. You just want it to be at least enough to make some opportunistic plays and get a win in this game. We'll talk about that game and fully break it down tomorrow. But then the other thing that I had in mind is Andy Kotelnicki at Penn State. This is a totally different offense than what they ran a couple of years ago, and it's something that they're going to have to figure out how they adapt to it, and Drew Aller's going to have to figure out how he fits into this offense. Maybe it takes a week or two. Maybe it's not as clean as you want it to be early on, and then they find their groove and really get going. But this is definitely one to watch as you get throughout these first couple of weeks. But definitely don't bury these people, because I do think there is a world where you just kind of adapt to the player in front of you, and you end up having a really, really good offense like Tommy Rees and Jalen Milroe a year ago at Alabama. So definitely going to be really interesting to watch there. The other thing I want to talk about is a higher-ranked team losing as an underdog, because this is a hard one to kind of get your head around. The whole Notre Dame against A&M game is the big conundrum in week 1. Is it an upset if Notre Dame loses, or is it an upset if A&M loses? Because A&M's favored in this game, but Notre Dame is the number 7 team in the country, A&M's the number 20. I tend to believe the line is a little bit better of a way to figure out what's an upset and what's not, but at the end of the day, anything within 4 points I don't really consider an upset anyway. I think they're all close enough to where it's pretty much a coin flip. I understand it's technically an upset, but I don't necessarily consider it that way by any means. And then there are a couple others that could happen throughout the season. I think Georgia-Bama could be an option here. I don't necessarily expect that to be the case, but it could be that, you know, Bama is the lower-ranked team, but being at home, they've played really good offense early on. They would be the favorite team possibly. And then Texas at Michigan is another one. Definitely don't expect that, honestly. I think the line is pretty much set where it's going to be unless Texas somehow loses this weekend. I expect them to be the favorite there, but there are a couple there that definitely could be really interesting, and maybe just don't bury that. Maybe Notre Dame, if they lose on Saturday, maybe just don't bury them too quickly, because that is a tough environment, and they weren't even favorites going into that game. So kind of a hard thing to gauge, but I think it's better to look at the line than the rankings, if I'm being totally honest. And then finally, these elite offenses could come out just looking a little bit iffy. Defenses tend to win the opening weeks. That's just how it's been the last couple of years, and I think it's something that really just makes sense, right? These offenses are a little bit more nuanced. It's a lot about timing. It's a lot about these little intricate things. Defense is a lot of go ball, see ball, go get ball. That's kind of the reality of defense. Now, there's a lot of nuances. I'm not saying there's not, but at the end of the day, it's a little bit easier to hit the ground running on defense than offense, and that's why you see some of these real defensive battles early on in the season. I think that's likely going to be the case this year. So whether it's Texas not looking all that great against Michigan, which I wouldn't be all that surprised about against a Michigan defense that is going to be outright ridiculous, or it's Ole Miss just not looking all that efficient throughout the first couple of weeks. Now, they play some layups, so they should be able to look efficient, but at the end of the day, maybe it looks not all the way there, or maybe Miami doesn't look all the way there, or even Florida doesn't look all the way there. So it'll be interesting to watch these ones unfold, but at the end of the day, I think in college football, we love to get caught up in overreactions, especially early on in the season. There are so many different ways to say a team is terrible or say a team is incredible. But at the end of the day, finding the middle ground in the first couple of weeks at the very least, and then letting yourself around week 4, week 5, let those hot takes fly. Say so-and-so is overrated. Say this guy cannot win the big one. Whatever you want to say at that point, I'm more than on board for. But the first couple of weeks, just let teams find themselves, let teams get into a groove, and then we'll see where everything stands around week 5, week 6. But let's take our last break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the players and coaches that are under a little bit of a microscope on week 1. Just what do we need to see from these guys, and how what they do on Saturday is pretty important for the rest of the season. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different overreactions that are going to happen throughout these next couple of weeks, and just want you guys to avoid it. If that young quarterback doesn't play all that great in his first big-time game, give him a little bit of slack. He'll find his way in the next couple of weeks, and I'm sure will be a much better player in week 10 than they were in week 2. But we'll break that down obviously throughout the year and see what overreactions are coming for us after this week 1, because I have a feeling there's going to be quite a few. But let's get into the players to watch this upcoming weekend, and all of these players kind of have different reasons to watch them. Some it's not the marquee game of the weekend, but you got to see specific things from these players to feel really confident as you head into the rest of the season. And for me, it starts with Jalen Milroe. I think this is one that obviously he's playing Western Kentucky. A lot of you will likely not be tuned into that game. But at the end of the day, you want to see him in this DeBoer offense, because obviously we talked about the DeBoer offense. It takes a lot of different forms. DeBoer is more than capable of handling this as a run-first offense, and that's likely what they will be this upcoming year. So I don't think it's going to be, he has to play the Michael Penix offense from a year ago by any means. He is going to have to make more NFL throws. He's going to have to make more of those layered second-level throws that Michael Penix was just outright elite at a year ago. So that's going to be kind of the biggest difference. And I think when you talk about Western Kentucky, it's a good taking off point. It's not a great pass defense. It's a team that's going to be able to pass the ball and maybe give you a couple extra possessions on offense that you need. So I think it's one of those games where you don't just want to see the deep ball in the run game. You can beat Western Kentucky using the deep ball in the run game in this game, but I want to see a couple of those big-time throws. I want to see a crosser over the middle that he layers over a corner and under a safety. I want to see an out route that he gets under a safety just barely in time. I want to see some of those plays that were lacking a year ago and he's more than capable of making, but strides have to be taken. So there's a couple of games here, WKU, South Florida, where it's not, a great team on the other side of the ball. It's a team that you absolutely should beat, but it's also a team that could cause problems for you. And it's going to give us a good idea of just where Jalen Milroe is in his progress. If he misses some of those balls the same way he did a year ago, maybe you're a little bit worried heading up to that Wisconsin game in week 3. But if he can hit all the spots, if he's doing everything on time and in rhythm, then maybe it's dangerous for pretty much everyone else in the entire country guarding this guy. But moving along here, Jaden Blue is the other guy that I'm watching very closely. I think with CJ Baxter going down, there's a lot of stuff you need to see from this kid on Saturday. They do get Colorado State, so got to feel pretty confident that you're going to be able to see plenty of stuff from this guy. But at the end of the day, when you talked about losing CJ Baxter, it wasn't that they didn't have the talent in that room to handle that loss. They absolutely do, and I think the 3 guys they have is going to be enough for this upcoming year. The in-between the tackle running, the pass pro is the 2 biggest things that were left behind when CJ Baxter went down. That's what you need to see from Jaden Blue. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be a finished product right away, but seeing him run between the A and B gap, seeing him, dominate in between the tackles, and then seeing him take that linebacker that's rushing and really hold him up is going to be huge for this team. So it's going to be kind of the mundane stuff. I know Jaden Blue can run 23 miles an hour and absolutely tear down the field for an 80-yard touchdown. And I probably will see that on Saturday, but that's not necessarily what I need to see. What I need to see is him gain 5 yards on a really tough run for third down. What I need to see is him pick up that extra blitzer when you don't expect it on a long third down. Like, all of that stuff is going to be hugely important for this team, and Jaden Blue is going to be the guy that's going to be called on to do a ton of that stuff throughout the season. So that's going to be the big thing I'm watching for him. And then Cade Klubnik, this one feels obvious. He's coming off a year where it looks so bad, if I'm being totally honest. And there were a number of things that were totally outside of Cade Klubnik's control that totally affected that. But he's going to be under a microscope pretty much from day one. But he does have a little bit of leeway in week 1. Let's be honest. When you're facing Georgia, you have just a little bit of leeway to look clunky at times. But what you want to see is just, is he more confident? Is he walking out on that field with his head held high? Is he controlling this offense a little bit better? Has he taken that leadership role over just a little bit better? And is he hitting guys in stride? Is this offense looking a little bit more multiple than it did a year ago? Because everyone has talked about this throughout the offseason. Garrett Riley was not calling his offense a year ago. He was calling Clemson's offense. Now, hopefully, he's calling his offense, and that's going to be a big thing to watch throughout Georgia's game, whether it's, they utilize motions more, they utilize a lot more wide receiver sets where there are not as many tight ends on the field, whatever that looks like. It's got to be more, and we got to see Cade Klubnik effectively run it, and I think it'll be really, really interesting to watch that. Can he go through his progressions? Is he confident throwing the ball? Is he confident in the system, at least as it looks against a Georgia defense that makes a lot of people look not too confident in their offense? But at the end of the day, if he's a guy that's going to be able to make the plays that they want him to make, this is a week that you're going to have to be watching him pretty closely. Cam Ward, this one's another obvious one, no doubt about it. He was brought in for a very specific purpose. They want to compete for a title. They want to go to the ACC title, win it, go to the playoff, and then possibly make some history, period. That's the entire goal of this season for Miami, and he's the guy they brought in to do it. Period, end of story. So it's going to be incredible to watch. It starts on Saturday, and he's going to be under a huge microscope because he's going to be on national television for everyone to watch at 3:30, and everyone's going to be watching that one at 3:30, except if you're a Texas fan, maybe you're watching the Texas game, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I'm going to be locked in on this one, and it's going to be incredible to watch it. But this guy has all the ability in the world. He can do everything you want him to do on the football field. He doesn't always do it all that consistently. That's the big time worry about him, and there are going to be people watching waiting for him to make that mistake. There are going to be people watching waiting to say Miami didn't go out and get the right quarterback in the portal, or say Miami, doesn't have the offensive coaching staff to get it done at this level. I don't think any of that stuff is true, but there will be people waiting in lines to do that for the Miami starting quarterback. I promise you that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. He's walking into the swamp for his first game at Miami. It's going to be a battle. And as long as I can see him feel confident, as long as I can see him comfortable in that pocket and then make a couple of those special plays that they brought him in there to make, I would feel pretty good if I was a Miami fan, even if I came out there with a slight loss, like I said earlier in the show. Anthony Knapp is another just plainly obvious one. I hate to say that this kid is going to be on full display in his very first game of college football, but he absolutely is. They have two incredibly good edge rushers on the other side for A&M. When you talk about Nick Scourton and when you talk about Cassius Howell, he's going to get a ton of those guys, and especially Nick Scourton, because they know what they have in Nick Scourton. He's going to dominate this kid. And frankly, I'm not expecting Anthony Knapp to do a ton on Saturday. I'm not expecting him to totally stonewall Nick Scourton or make sure he doesn't get one sack on the day. What I am hoping to see is that he just plays sound football. You know, he shields. He doesn't try to win the rep. He just tries to shield Nick Scourton off to the side, get Riley Leonard a running lane. Or you try to hold him up just for long enough for Riley Leonard to get that RPO out. All of these little things that, you know, it might not look perfect throughout the day on Saturday. Frankly, I think it's going to look far from perfect for Anthony Knapp. But at the end of the day, I think he can tie it all together and just play good football. Just hold serve with Nick Scourton for enough plays that Notre Dame can break a couple of big-time plays on offense and totally change this game. And then Riley Leonard obviously going to be under a microscope. A primetime game, a team that finally feels like they have the guys in that building to possibly win a national title, and he's the guy at the center of it. So it's going to be incredible to watch this guy, especially handle what Kyle Field has in store for him, because that place is going to be crazy, but it's going to be really, really interesting to watch this kid. I think he's a very, very talented guy, but coming into a new offense that is not necessarily the offense that leans towards his strengths all that much, it's going to be really interesting to watch what he can do in week one, and there will be some conclusions drawn one way or the other, I can promise you that. Moving on, Harold Perkins is someone that we're just going to have to watch on Saturday because the LSU defense is just not going to be great, plain and simple. They're just not going to be the team that you want them to be, at least that LSU fans want them to be on the defensive side of the ball. That doesn't mean their new number 7, Harold Perkins, can't make plays, and he absolutely can. He's someone that it's kind of under a microscope in a weird type of way. You know, this defense is not going to be great. I expect them to give up quite a few points on Saturday. I want to see Harold Perkins in the right places. I want to see Harold Perkins rushing the passer. I want to see Harold Perkins guarding someone, guarding a running back out of the backfield. I want to see Harold Perkins being multiple. That's the end goal for Harold Perkins this upcoming year, where last year it was not that. He was very, very stagnant because he was not put in the positions that he needs to be to succeed. So I want to see this guy all over the field, just playing every single position you could possibly imagine, and especially rushing the passer, because that's when he's really special. And that obviously comes down to Blake Baker. He's going to be under a big-time microscope early on in this season, and it kind of stinks for him because this USC offense is going to be a nightmare to stop, and frankly, I'd be surprised if they were able to stop it even a little bit. But at the end of the day, what you want to see is the technically sound stuff. You want to see better tackling. You want to see guys handling their assignments just a little bit better, and you want to see guys that play harder than they did a year ago. That's the end goal in this game. So it's not necessarily a ton, but you're definitely going to want to see a good bit from Blake Baker just in terms of confidence and play calling and tackling, all the nuanced stuff that just makes it a little bit better for this offense in 2024. And then moving on to the other side, Bear Alexander is one of the most important players for this USC team, bar none. He is absolutely huge, and if they're going to make noise in the Big Ten with all of the heavy run offenses, they need an interior D lineman that's going to be a game changer. And Alexander is really the only guy in that room that I feel really confident can do that. So he's showed it in flashes throughout his career, whether it was at Georgia or at USC, but this LSU O-line is really good. And I saw Will Campbell and him going back and forth just a little bit. I love a little bit of smack talk as we head up to these games. But at the end of the day, Bear Alexander is the guy that just needs to make plays for this team. And then obviously, for the same reason you're watching Blake Baker, you're going to be watching DeAnton Lynn. It doesn't have to look perfect. It probably won't look perfect. It'll look far from perfect if I had to imagine, but be better, tackle better. play as a unit, look tough at the line of scrimmage. Even if you don't necessarily win it the entire night, look like you're holding your own just a little bit better. So it's kind of those nuanced things again. You're not looking at those big grandiose things. How many points do they hold LSU to, or how many yards per play, all that type of stuff. It's just when a play is right in front of these teams, when a play is right in front of an LSU linebacker, or right in front of a USC DB, do they make that play? Because last year they didn't, and it led to a lot of huge plays down the field. If they can make that minuscule step this upcoming year, they're going to jump pretty far in those rankings for total defense. But it'll be interesting to watch that unfold. There's no doubt about that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and we will be back once again for more of the Week 1 predictions tomorrow.